Okay, folks, let us resolve the cliffhanger from our last presentation. Let's talk about Aristotle's life of moderation. So, as stated in our previous lecture, Aristotle argued that the good life for human beings is a well-rounded existence of physical, intellectual, and emotional health. And this human purpose or function is not something which is optional. It's not something which is relative, where it's like, oh, well, that's good for you that you want to be well-rounded. I'll just be, unidimensional. For Aristotle, this human purpose or function has been given to humanity by nature. It is a universal standard that we all have to adhere to. And by adhering to this function, human beings develop ever closer to the ideal human form. And when human beings live a good life, they experience what Aristotle calls eudaimonia, or happiness, which for him is to experience, or the experience of being fully alive and fully functioning. But here's the question we left off with last time. What does Aristotle's good life look like on a daily basis? That is, how exactly does one become well-rounded and healthy? For Aristotle, to achieve the ideal human form, one must live a life of moderation, or a well-balanced lifestyle dedicated to hitting the mark between the extremes of excess and deficiency. And Aristotle argued that the lives of people who exist according to the extreme will indulge in some aspects of their life while denying other crucial aspects. So let's go over a couple of examples. So for instance, Aristotle would say that this bodybuilder is not living a good life. Why? Because she probably spends 75% of her time at the gym. And so therefore, although she is excessively healthy physically, she is deficient probably in terms of her emotional life with her relationships, as well as in her intellectual life. Now, of course, we're making assumptions here, but this is something that, at least based on appearances, one, or at least Aristotle might argue, that she is not living a good life because she's not living a life of moderation, but rather a life dedicated to the extreme of physical health. Now, the same logic can be used when we talk about, let's say, Wall Street executives. So Wall Street executives, work like 80 hours a week, constantly making deals or whatever Wall Street execs do. I've never been part of that world. But Aristotle would say, again, this is an excessive lifestyle. Being a workaholic impacts your physical health, your intellectual health, your emotional health. So although they might be virtuous supposedly in their profession, they're excessively doing it, and therefore they'll be deficient in other areas of their life. So they have failed at the life of moderation. So if one dedicates their life to this lifestyle of moderation, then they are dedicating themselves to what is called the principle of the mean. And I have a chart here to kind of demonstrate it. So to live your life according to the principle of the mean means that you are dedicated to hitting the mark in the middle, at the bullseye, as it were, between the vices of deficiency and excess. So for example, if one lives their life according to the principle of the mean, when it comes to their physical health, they should be, according to Aristotle, physically active. So, go to the gym a couple times a week, walk, just kind of not sit around a lot. So that is kind of like the moderate physical activity. But if you're a couch potato and you're inactive and you do nothing, then that's a vice because you are physically deficient. However, if you're a bodybuilder, that means you're overactive, which means that you are excessive in your physical activity, and therefore that is a vice as well. Same thing, or the same kind of logic can be used when we discuss one's work-life balance. So one should be hardworking in their life, because that's kind of the middle or mean virtue. But if one is lazy and they don't do any work at all, then they are deficient, and that's a vice. But if someone is a workaholic, that is excessive, and that is a vice as well. Same logic can be used in terms of one's love life. For Aristotle, the most natural form of human romantic relationship is monogamy. That is kind of the way nature has intended human beings to be. If one renounces sex and they are celibate, it's a deficiency, it's a vice. If they're promiscuous and they have multiple partners, then that's excessive and that's a vice as well. And lastly, as far as one's intellectual life, one should be learned. One should not be ignorant, because that's a deficiency, so you are completely ignoring your intellectual needs. But one should also not be excessive in their intellectual pursuits, because then they don't have enough time to kind of like get out, meet people, they don't go to the gym, they just kind of stay in their libraries all day and read with their face in a book. And again, that's excessive. That's not considered virtuous for Aristotle. So again, for Aristotle, the life of moderation is not a lifestyle of individual preference. Rather, it is a universal standard that all human beings ought to adopt in their lives so that they can become well-rounded and healthy. So here's the thing. If this life of moderation is so natural, because nature has bestowed it upon us, then why is it that not all people, indeed most people I would argue, don't adopt the life of moderation? Well, for Aristotle, most people do not embark on the life of moderation because, one, most people lack sufficient knowledge as to how to live a well-rounded, healthy lifestyle. So they may be driven to do it, but they just don't know how. And secondly, most people lack conscious discipline and thus suffer from weakness of will. So some people know that they should eat a certain way and socialize a certain way, but they lack the discipline to do it. Now, to better appreciate this point, let's take a look at Aristotle's psychology, or his theory of the tripartite or three-part soul. So for Aristotle, the human psyche, or the material mind, is comprised of three different parts: the rational soul, the sensitive soul, and the nutritive soul. Now, the nutritive soul refers to our lowest kind of animal drives and desires, and it refers to the desire for food, clothing, and shelter. So for Aristotle, some people focus their lives on satisfying the nutritive soul, and they ignore the sensitive and the rational soul. And for him, that is like living like cattle. You're no better than an animal. The second soul is the sensitive soul, which is the part of the soul which desires positive sensations like positive flavors, aromas, joy, sex, companionship, etc. And again, Aristotle is going to argue that some people dedicate most of their time to satisfying the sensitive soul, or to living a life of pleasure and avoiding pain. And then we have the highest form of the soul, the rational soul, which desires knowledge, so knowledge of science, morality, and how to achieve virtue. And for people who kind of focus upon, utilizing their rational soul, for him, they are the happiest and the most fully human. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is the following. Aristotle does not argue that human beings should ignore the needs of the nutritive soul and the sensitive soul. Those things are required in order to survive and to live a good life. But for Aristotle, one should use the rational soul to properly order and regulate the drives and desires of the sensitive and the nutritive soul. So all of the souls need to be satisfied, but they must be governed by the rational soul. And most people don't live a life of moderation because they don't listen to the rational soul. They listen more to the sensitive or the nutritive soul. So, in conclusion, the goal of life for Aristotle is to properly balance and regulate our drives and desires to the life of moderation. And to do this, the rational soul, the highest soul, must order and regulate the lesser souls, which results in a fully functioning, healthy, and happy lifestyle. So in conclusion, 3 points can kind of summarize Aristotle's good life theory. 1, human beings have an inherent purpose or telos to become one with the ideal human form or essence. 2nd, in fulfilling our purpose, we experience eudaimonia, our happiness. And in adopting the life of moderation, we become intellectually, physically, and emotionally healthy individuals, which is the way nature intended us to be. So what are your thoughts, on Aristotle's theory of the good life? Um, is this a standard that all people should adopt in their life? Do you think it falls short in some ways? What do you think? We'll talk about it in our discussion.